I am Nicolas Forero. I've worked with over 70 organizations, and now I work specifically in the alternative education space. If you're new here, welcome. I think you will recognize your school in what I'm about to describe. If you're back, let's just get into it. Now, here's the thing I hear from almost every school founder I talk to. They'll say something like, we have the business side, and then we have the education side. Like those two are separate rooms in the building. The teachers are in one room doing the real work. And somewhere else, usually an afterthought, there's somebody worrying about enrollment, marketing, and money. I'm gonna tell you something that most people in education don't wanna hear. That division is killing your school. There's no education side and business side. There's one thing, and it's all one system. What happens in the classroom determines who stays. And what happens in marketing determines who walks in. And when those two things don't talk to each other, you get schools that are changing lives in the classroom and bleeding families out the back door. And nobody can figure out why. I know this because I made the same mistake from the other direction. I came from the tech world. I joined a school as an executive about a year and a half ago. And within 3 months, I was hitting every growth number the school had ever seen, while quietly also setting the stage to destroy the school culture. And I'm gonna tell you exactly what happened because the lesson applies whether you're coming from the business side or the education side. But first, let me show you what this divide actually cost. Because there are numbers hiding in the gap between your classroom and your admissions process that nobody's looking at. Let's say you have 6 teachers at your school. 3 of them retain 95% of the families in their classes year over year. The other 3, they only retain about 50%. Now here's my question. Does anyone at your school know that? Has anyone ever looked at retention by teacher? In most schools I work with, the answer is no. And it's not because the data is hard to get, it's because retention lives on the business side and teaching lives on the education side. So nobody connects the two. Now here's a number for context, and that is that according to the National Association of Independent Schools, and this is backed by data from the schools that I work with, the average attrition rate at private schools is somewhere around 8 to 12% per year. I would say significantly higher for schools that are just innovating just a little bit outside of the norm. Now, if we keep within somewhere around 8 to 12% per year, that means that even at well-run schools, roughly 1 in 10 families leaves annually. But the schools I work with that don't track this by teacher, some of them have individual classrooms running at 30, 40, even 50% attrition, 5 times the national average. And nobody knows because nobody's looking. With the clients I work with, I'm usually looking for a re-enrollment rate between 80 to 90%. Schools below that threshold have a structural problem, but the schools I'm describing aren't just below that. Some classrooms are at 50% and nobody knows it. Now think about what that gap means financially. If your tuition is $15,000 a year and a family stays an average of 3 years, every family that leaves early is up to $30,000 in lost lifetime tuition. That's the total amount that they would have stayed in the remaining years, assuming they had stayed. If you have 3 teachers losing half their families every year and 3 others keeping almost all of them, there are hundreds of thousands of dollars sitting in the gap between those two numbers. And again, usually nobody's asking the question. If your school has teachers who seem to keep families year after year and other teachers who seem to lose them, that's not a teaching problem, and it's also not a marketing problem. It's information that both sides need. And when you keep them separate, nobody gets it. Now here's another issue. I consult with a school that had been operating for about 20 years. For most of that time, families had stayed an average of 7 years. Incredible retention. But recently, that dropped to about 4. Now there are real external factors: more school choice, more homeschooling options, more micro schools, state voucher programs, opening up new alternatives. Those are real things. But when I looked at what was happening inside the school, one of the simplest things missing was this. Nobody was reminding families what they were paying. The school charged monthly, but they had no system, nothing, where each month, close to when the bill hit, someone at the school said, hey, here's what your child accomplished this month. Here's the growth we've seen. Not a report card, not a progress report, something personal. Something that gives families specific knowledge for the growth their child was experiencing. Time to when the family will be charged. Most schools are not thinking about retention, are not doing simple actions like this. And when they don't, families are left to form their own narrative about the value they're getting. Some might say, my kid seems happy, and that might be enough to stay. But for a lot of families, seems happy isn't a strong enough language to justify $15,000, $30,000, $45,000 a year when a new option appears. When families have to create language for the transformation, not just a feeling. Retention, it changes. I've seen it change meaningfully at this school that I've been working with. The specifics of how we structure it are something I work through with clients, but the principle is what matters. Somebody at the school was actively reinforcing the family's decision to stay. If your school charges monthly or quarterly, ask yourself, what does a family receive from you the week before that bill hits? If the answer is nothing, or worse, If the only individual emails families get from teachers are about problems, it's just one of many problems that comes up when nobody's translating the education into a language that reinforces the family's decision to stay. But the reality is that that note from the teacher, not from the marketing team, might be the single highest leverage retention action a school might take. And it sits in the gap between education and business that nobody owns. By the way, this is what I actually do for schools. I find the gaps between education and business where families and money are falling through. If you're watching this and thinking, I have no idea what my retention looks like by teacher, there's a link in the description for a diagnostic call. I will look at your school's numbers and I'll tell you where to look first. Let's keep going because I need to tell you a story about myself. When I came into the school where I serve as an executive, I came from a completely different world. I had been doing digital marketing for US software companies since my early 20s. By 21, I was at one of the best content marketing agencies in the US, working with brands you've heard of: Google, Spotify, Canva, Amazon. By 22, I was directing work for vice presidents of marketing and CEOs 3 times my age. I knew how to generate attention, lower acquisition cost, build systems that move people from never heard of you to I'm ready to buy. And I was pretty good at it. So when I walked into this school as an executive, I applied everything I knew. And it worked on paper. Within the first 3 months, we were getting more interesting families reaching out than the school had ever seen. They were more qualified, it cost less to reach. The calendar was full of enrollment conversations. But here's what I also brought with me from the tech world that almost wrecked everything. I wanted predictable enrollment levels that went up every single month, regardless of the season. I wanted families to be available year-round on my timeline, not theirs. I wanted the sales process to run like a software company, commission-based incentives, everyone acting like closers, urgency at every step. I wanted to apply the same playbook that worked for software companies to a school full of children and families. None of it fit. Because here's what's different about a school that I didn't understand at first. In a software company, your customers don't interact with each other. One bad customer churns quietly. In a school, your families are the community. One wrong fit family doesn't just leave. They disrupt the classroom, they affect the teacher, they change the experience for every other family in that cohort. Seasonality is also real. Families don't switch schools in November the way someone switches software. And the people doing the core work, the teachers, they're not motivated many times by commissions. They're motivated by seeing children grow. If you try to incentivize them like salespeople, I've seen you lose them. And I was, again, ignoring all of this. I wasn't thinking about what happened after those families enrolled. I wasn't thinking about how they had interacted with each other in the classroom. I wasn't talking to teachers. I wasn't sitting in on classes. I wasn't asking, are the families I'm bringing in, are they the kind of families that make this school better? If you have ever hired an agency or a marketing consultant who came in, generated a bunch of inquiries, hit some numbers on a dashboard, and then you were left dealing with the followed, families who didn't belong, teachers who were frustrated, a school culture that got diluted, this is exactly what was happening. The metrics look great, but the experience, we had a risk of it falling apart. If I hadn't had incredible mentors who were educators, the school founder, the head of school, the teachers themselves, I would have destroyed a culture while hitting every growth target. What saved me was that the people around me didn't let me stay ignorant. The founder has decades of experience building educational environments. And instead of, firing me or sidelining me, he invested time. We started having weekly conversations about pedagogy, about what makes a great classroom, about what kind of families thrive in this model versus which ones struggle, about why certain things that I was pushing for would have damaged the learning environment even if they boosted enrollment. I started sitting in on classes. I started reading about education, not marketing books, education books. I started understanding things I had never considered, like the fact that a classroom is a culture and culture is fragile, that a teacher who feels supported often teaches differently than a teacher who feels pressure. That the best indicator of whether a family will stay isn't their initial enthusiasm, it's whether they are aligned with how the school actually works day to day. And then I went further than I think most people in my position would. I doubled down on my Master in Liberal Arts at St. John's, not because I needed the credential, but because I wanted to understand from the inside what a real education looks like. For 2.5 years, I sat in Socratic seminars reading Darwin, reading foundational texts across mathematics, literature, philosophy. Nobody told me what to think. The teacher asked an opening question and we explored, and that experience, being a student again in an environment built on inquiry, changed how I see everything about enrollment. And all of these just started to come into play once I realized that I, the business guy, needed to understand education, needed to talk to it if I wanted to serve the families from this school in my best capability. I couldn't be the marketing person, I couldn't let educators just be the education people. We both needed to be part of the same system. And I'm telling you this because there's a very specific conclusion most school founders reach after a bad experience with a marketing person. They conclude, business people, they don't get education. I need to keep them separate. And I understand that conclusion. It makes sense, even what a lot of you experience. But the answer isn't to separate business from education. The answer is to find someone who did the work to learn both, or for you to become that person. Here's what the integration looks like. And this is what happened after I stopped treating schools like startups and started treating them as one system. Over the following year of working with this school, the families who enrolled cost less to acquire, and teachers reported that they were happier with who was walking in the door. Families stayed longer, they referred more people, they were more engaged, they talked about the school more often and more enthusiastically. And we didn't even ask them to do it. And it was not because I stopped doing marketing or stopped doing business things, but it was because I started integrating what I knew about growth with what the educators taught me about fit. I'm now part of every conversation at this school, from conversations with teachers, to the head of school, to the founder, to investors, not because I forced my way in, but because when you see education and business as a single system, you have to be in all of those conversations. The enrollment strategy cannot live in a silo. It has to be informed by what's happening in the classroom. And the classroom has to be informed by what families are being told before they walk in. That's what one system actually looks like in practice. And it's what I now build for every school I work with. Think about your school for a moment. When was the last time your marketing person, whoever handles admissions, enrollment, outreach, sat in on a class? When was the last time a teacher was asked, what kind of families work best in your classroom? If the answer is never, or I'm not sure, that gap is costing you families, and neither side knows it. This is what I do. I sit inside schools, both as an executive and as a consultant, and I find the places where the education side and the business side aren't talking to each other. The gaps where families fall through, where retention leaks happen, where money disappears because nobody's connecting what happens in the classroom to what happens in enrollment. The program is called the Right Families Method. It's a 12-week engagement where I go into your school, your data, your admissions process, your retention, your marketing, and I find where those two sides are disconnected. One diagnostic call, and you will know exactly where the gap is and what it's costing you. If anything in this video made you think, this person gets both sides of what I'm dealing with, that's the call to book. The link is in the description. If you run an alternative school and you've been feeling the tension between great education and sustainable enrollment, subscribe. I put up videos like this every week. Real data, real stories, real philosophy from inside the work. Leave a comment. Do you separate education and business at your school? I'm genuinely curious whether you recognize this divide, and if you've tried to bridge it, I want to hear what happened.